Today we're going to look at analyzing conditional statements. Our objectives are to be able to identify the conditional, converse, inverse, and contrapositive of a conditional statement and write them in symbolic form. We will also be able to use the law of the contrapositive to determine the truth value of a statement. What is this advertisement trying to tell us? Is it saying that all people who go to McDonald's must say the phrase, "I'm loving it"? No. Perhaps it means something more like, if we go to McDonald's, then we will enjoy the food. There's a premise there, a hypothesis. If we go to McDonald's, then we will enjoy the food, or something like that. The premise being, we're going to go to McDonald's. The conclusion being, we will enjoy the food. A lot of statements, conditional statements, we see all around us, like this advertisement from McDonald's. A conditional statement is a logical statement that has two parts, a hypothesis or a premise, and a conclusion. The hypothesis or the premise comes at the beginning, the conclusion at the end. Now, sometimes it's not going to be in that order, but the hypothesis or premise is what the statement is based on. The conclusion depends on that hypothesis or premise perhaps being true. Now, conditional statements will not always be in an if-then form. I changed the advertisement from the McDonald's logo to an if-then statement because it was more logical when we thought about it that way. It's nice to be able to think of the conditional statement as written in if-then form. It's just easier to work with in that way. Symbolically, we can write a conditional statement with a letter for the hypothesis, an arrow showing the flow of direction, and a Q for the conclusion, or any letters of the alphabet, usually going in alphabetical order, as that one does. Symbolic notation helps us to simplify statements. We go in alphabetical order when we pick the letters we want to use, if we get to choose. And usually the letters that come first are going to stand for the hypothesis or the premise, the Q for the conclusion, or what letter comes after what we've chosen in the alphabet, and the arrow is for direction, the direction of the flow. Let's look at some examples. Identify the hypothesis or premise and the conclusion of each statement. If the weather is warm, then we should go swimming. When a statement is already in if-then form, it's pretty clear to see the hypothesis or premise is everything that comes after the if, doesn't include the if. The conclusion, we should go swimming, is everything that comes after the then, doesn't include the then. The conclusion is based on the premise that the weather is warm is a true statement. If it's not in an if-then form, it's a little bit trickier. All Parkview students are patriots. This is an assumption that a student is from Parkview. So the hypothesis being that a student is from Parkview, we would assume that to be true. If a student is from Parkview, then what has to be true about that student? The student is a patriot. So this is a little bit different. Here, we might need to write out the hypothesis or the premise is that a student is from Parkview, and then the conclusion being the student is a patriot. Let's practice writing some conditional statements in if-then form since it makes it easier to work with. Rewrite these as conditional statements in if-then form. Then use symbolic notation to identify the hypothesis and conclusion, assigning your own letters to each part. Geometry students always pass the SOL. This is kind of like the other one. Assuming there is a student who takes geometry, what will happen? The student will pass the SOL. So I might start with if a student takes geometry, and end with then he or she or the student passes the SOL. The hypothesis is everything that comes after the if, let's call it A, and the conclusion is everything that comes after the then, let's call it B. Therefore, our statement would be translated as A, arrow B. How about you pause the video, take a look at number 4, and come back and see how you did. Now this one's a bit tricky because there's an if in the middle of the sentence. What does that mean? All of that is the hypothesis or the premise. If yesterday was Sunday, there's our hypothesis, then today is Monday. There's our conclusion according to the statement given to us. Let's call the hypothesis this time C and the conclusion D and write it as C, arrow D. So there's a nice little introduction to conditional statements and symbolic notation.